The grand halls of the Zillethian Empire were unlike anything a human had ever seen. Towering crystal spires reflected the twin suns, casting shimmering patterns across the marble floor. The air smelled of exotic spices and unfamiliar flowers, a scent both inviting and overwhelming. Commander Ryan Voss walked through the corridors, his footsteps echoing as alien nobles whispered in hushed tones. He wasn't surprised. Humans were still new to the galactic stage, and many species viewed them as unpredictable. Some feared them, others mocked them. Ryan didn't care. He was here as a soldier, representing Earth in diplomatic talks. But someone was watching him. High above the throne room, hidden behind an ornate silk curtain, Princess Veliura observed the human carefully. She had seen many warriors from different planets, tall reptilian brutes, elegant telepathic beings, even insectoid strategists with thousands of years of battle knowledge. But never had she seen a human soldier in person. And it unsettled her. His broad shoulders, the sharpness in his eyes, the way he carried himself, so steady, so confident, made her chest tighten in a strange way. Her hands trembled slightly, and she felt a strange heat rise in her body. A shiver crawled down her spine. "What is this feeling?" she whispered. Her attendants noticed her expression change. The princess, usually calm and composed, now looked uneasy, almost disturbed. "My lady, are you unwell?" one of her maids asked, concerned. Veliura didn't answer. Instead, she abruptly turned away and rushed out of the chamber. She needed to cleanse herself. She felt unclean after looking at the human. In a separate chamber, Veliura stood before a large golden basin filled with fragrant water. She splashed cool liquid onto her face, her hands rubbing against her skin as if trying to remove some unseen stain. But no matter how much she washed, the sensation lingered. A deep breath, a pause. She closed her eyes and recalled what she had felt. It wasn't disgust. No, it was something else. Something she had never felt before. Why? What was it about this human warrior that made her feel so restless? Veliura looked at her reflection in the water. Her usually calm, elegant features were now flushed, confused, almost vulnerable. This had never happened before. She had to stay away from him. But fate had other plans. Because tomorrow, she would have to stand face to face with the human soldier. And something told her that was only the beginning. Princess Veliura sat in her private chambers, staring at her reflection in the tall crystal mirror. The water from her cleansing ritual had dried, but the strange restlessness in her chest remained. No matter how much she tried to push the feeling away, it stayed. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "It's just a reaction," she whispered to herself. "A natural instinct." But was it? Her mind replayed the moment she saw the human soldier, his strong build, the way he walked, the unshakable confidence in his eyes. Her hands clenched into fists. It made her feel vulnerable. And that made her angry. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she said, regaining her calm expression. Her maid, Larina, stepped inside, bowing respectfully. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "My lady, there are rumors." Veliura frowned. "What rumors?" "The court whispers that you felt unwell after seeing the human soldier." Veliura's eyes narrowed. Of course, the nobles would gossip. They always searched for weakness in others. "I simply had a reaction," she said firmly. "It means nothing." Larina hesitated again before speaking. Some believe it might be the ancient instinct. Silence filled the room. Veliura's stomach twisted. The ancient instinct, a rare, deep-rooted reaction that only occurred when a Zillethian encountered someone who triggered a biological response. For some, it was fear. For others, something stronger. She refused to believe it. "Nonsense," she said, standing up. "Humans are new. I've never encountered their kind before. It's simply shock." Larina looked uncertain but nodded. "There is one way to be sure, my lady," she said carefully. You must see him again. Veliera froze. See him again. The very idea made her breath hitch. But she was the future queen. She couldn't let some primitive human shake her composure. I will meet him, she said, voice steady. Lorena bowed and left the chamber. But as soon as the door closed, Veliera let out a slow, shaky breath. Deep down, she wasn't sure if she was ready. Because something about that human soldier was changing her in a way she couldn't understand. And that terrified her. The grand throne room of the Zilethian Empire was filled with nobles, warriors, and diplomats from across the galaxy. Tall banners hung from the ceiling, displaying ancient symbols of the royal house. The air was heavy with the scent of incense, and a low hum of whispers echoed through the chamber. Commander Ryan Voss walked into the hall, his boots tapping against the polished floor. He felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes on him. He was used to it. Humans were still a mystery to many alien races. Some viewed them as weak because they lacked natural weapons. Others saw them as dangerous because of their unpredictable nature. Ryan didn't care. His mission was simple: represent Earth and prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars. At the far end of the chamber, sitting on a raised platform, was the Zilethian Emperor, a regal figure with shimmering golden skin. But Ryan's eyes weren't on him. They were on the princess. Princess Veliera sat beside her father, dressed in a flowing silk gown that shimmered under the light. Her posture was perfect, her face calm. But the moment her violet eyes met his, something flashed across them. Shock, hesitation, and something else. For a split second, her fingers tightened around the armrest of her seat. Then, just as quickly, she looked away. Ryan frowned. Had he done something wrong? The Emperor spoke, addressing the gathered guests, but Ryan barely listened. His focus remained on the princess. Something about her reaction didn't make sense. Suddenly, without a word, Veliera stood up. The entire room stilled. Her attendants looked at one another in confusion as she quickly turned and walked away, exiting through a side door. Ryan raised an eyebrow. What was that about? The Emperor cleared his throat, drawing attention back to him. "We welcome our human guest," he said, his deep voice echoing across the chamber. "May this meeting bring understanding between our people." Ryan gave a polite nod, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Why had the princess left so suddenly? On the other side of the palace, Veliera hurried into her private quarters, her breathing slightly uneven. The moment she saw him up close, her body reacted again. Her skin felt warm, her heart pounded. It was the same feeling as before. She rushed to the cleansing basin and splashed cold water on her face. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "It's just a human. A simple, unremarkable human." Then why did he make her feel this way? She gripped the edge of the basin, staring at her reflection. Something was happening to her, and she didn't know how to stop it. Princess Veliera sat on the edge of her silk-covered bed, staring at her trembling hands. The cool water she had splashed on her face moments ago had already dried, but the heat in her chest refused to fade. This had never happened before. She had seen warriors from across the galaxy, powerful, brutal, elegant, and cunning. Some were stronger than humans, faster, and far more advanced. Yet, none of them had made her feel this way. Why? Why did her body react so strangely whenever she saw Commander Ryan Voss? She took a deep breath, pressing her palms against her knees, trying to calm herself. She was the heir to the Zilethian throne. She couldn't afford to lose control. A soft knock came at her chamber door. "My lady," her attendant Lorena said gently. "May I enter?" Veliera straightened, forcing herself to appear composed. "Come in." Lorena stepped inside, bowing slightly before speaking. "You left the throne room so suddenly. The court is confused." Veliera clenched her jaw. She knew the nobles were already whispering about her behavior. They would see it as a sign of weakness. "I felt unwell," she said simply. Lorena hesitated, then spoke carefully. "It is because of the human, isn't it?" Veliara stiffened. The attendant's words struck too close to the truth. "I do not know what you mean," the princess replied coldly, standing up and walking toward the balcony. But Lyrena didn't back down. "My lady, there are stories. Ancient records of our ancestors reacting like this when encountering something or someone that affects them on a deep primal level." Veliara turned, eyes narrowing. "You are suggesting that a mere human soldier has somehow triggered an instinctive response within me." Lyrena lowered her gaze. "I do not wish to offend, my lady, but your body's reaction, your need to cleanse yourself, it is not rejection. It is something else." Veliara's heart pounded. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to shout that it was impossible. And yet, she knew Lyrena was right. She had tried to cleanse herself, but it wasn't because she felt disgusted. It was because she wanted to erase the strange, growing desire to see him again. She turned back to the balcony, gripping the railing tightly. Below, in the palace courtyard, Ryan stood speaking with other soldiers, his posture relaxed yet strong. Even now, the sight of him made something in her stir. This was dangerous. She was the princess of the Zilathian Empire. He was a human soldier. She could not allow this to continue. But deep down, she knew it was already too late. Princess Veliara spent the next day trying to ignore the strange feeling inside her. She buried herself in royal duties, attending meetings, listening to political discussions, and reviewing defense reports. She did everything she could to keep her mind busy. But no matter how hard she tried, her thoughts kept drifting back to him. Commander Ryan Voss, the human soldier with a steady gaze and a powerful presence, the one who made her heart race in a way no other warrior ever had. She scolded herself for this weakness. She was royalty. She had control over her emotions, and yet every time she thought about him, she felt unsettled. Was it admiration? No, that couldn't be it. Discomfort? Possibly. Or was it something deeper, something she was afraid to admit? Her fingers curled around the edges of a delicate scroll as she sat alone in her study. "This is nonsense," she muttered under her breath. A sudden knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "My lady," Lyrena said from the hallway, "Commander Ryan has been invited to the royal gardens this evening. Your father wishes for you to join the gathering." Veliara stiffened. She would have to see him again, face to face. Her heartbeat quickened. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her posture. "Very well. I will be there." That evening, the royal gardens were illuminated by soft golden lights, casting a warm glow over the towering trees and shimmering fountains. Nobles and diplomats mingled, discussing trade agreements and military alliances. And then, among them, stood Ryan. Dressed in a formal military uniform, he looked different. Less like a soldier, more like a leader. His presence was effortless, his posture confident. His deep blue eyes scanned the garden, as if studying his surroundings like a battlefield. Veliara watched from a distance, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her gown. Why was she so aware of him? He was just a human. And yet, her body reacted before her mind could catch up. Before she could turn away, Ryan's gaze met hers. For a moment, everything else faded. The noise of the gathering, the voices of the nobles, even the rustling of the trees. It all became distant. It was just the two of them. A flicker of something unreadable passed through Ryan's expression. Then, to her surprise, he gave a slight nod, a respectful, yet confident gesture. Veliara's breath hitched. She quickly turned and walked away, heading toward the fountain, pretending she hadn't noticed. But deep inside, she knew the truth. She had noticed. And for the first time, she was afraid of what it meant. The next day, the royal court gathered in the training arena, where the Zilathian warriors practiced their combat skills. Ryan Voss had been invited to demonstrate his abilities in front of the Zilathian military leaders, a rare honor for any foreign guest. Veliara stood on the high balcony, watching the event unfold. She could see Ryan at the far side of the arena, his uniform now replaced with a simple combat outfit. He stood tall, his broad shoulders relaxed but ready for action. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't look away. Ryan was facing off against a Xylathian warrior, a tall, well-built man with scales that shimmered like metal. He was a fierce fighter, known for his incredible strength. The crowd around the arena was eager to see how the human would perform. Veliura's stomach tightened as she watched the two men circle each other. Ryan's movements were calm, deliberate. He watched his opponent, studying every slight shift in posture, every twitch of muscle. Then, with a speed that surprised everyone, he launched himself forward. In one fluid motion, he sidestepped the warrior's strike and used the momentum to throw him onto the ground. The crowd gasped. Even the Xylathian soldiers seemed stunned. Veliura's heart raced. How had he done that? Ryan stood over the defeated warrior, offering him a hand to help him up. The crowd fell silent, unsure of how to respond. Ryan turned to face the royal balcony, his eyes scanning the crowd. When he saw Veliura, he paused for a brief moment. There it was again, the flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition. Respect. Veliura's pulse quickened. What was he thinking? But before she could gather her thoughts, the Xylathian emperor stood, breaking the silence. "Well done, Commander Voss," he said, his voice booming. "You have proven yourself a warrior worthy of our respect." Ryan bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Veliura felt an odd mixture of admiration and confusion. She had never seen a human fight so efficiently, so intelligently. His movements were not driven by strength alone. They were driven by strategy and precision. As the demonstration ended and the crowd began to disperse, Veliura felt an unexpected tug in her chest. Ryan's presence had unsettled her once again. She had told herself that her reaction to him was just a temporary response, that it would pass with time. But the more she saw him, the more impossible it seemed to ignore what was happening. Her body, her mind, both were responding to him in ways she couldn't explain. As the soldiers and nobles cleared out of the arena, Veliura turned to leave the balcony. She needed space, needed time to think. But somewhere deep inside, she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. Princess Veliura paced back and forth in her private chamber, her mind racing. The events of the day had left her disoriented. She had always been in control, always able to manage her emotions. Yet, for the past few days, Commander Ryan Voss had been occupying her thoughts in ways she couldn't ignore. Her hand gripped the edge of her desk as she thought back to the combat demonstration. His ease, his skill, the way he had turned the fight into a strategic display, it had all left her in awe. More than that, it had left her curious, her thoughts constantly circling back to him. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "My lady," Lyrena's voice came softly from the other side. "The human soldier has requested a private audience with you." Veliura paused. She hadn't expected this. "Send him in," she said, her voice more steady than she felt. The door opened, and Commander Ryan Voss stepped inside. His tall figure filled the doorway, his presence immediately filling the room. Veliura forced herself to stand tall, to remain composed. "Commander," she said, her tone neutral, "to what do I owe the honor of your visit?" Ryan's eyes met hers with an intensity that took her by surprise. There was no hesitation, no fear, just calm confidence. "I wanted to speak with you, Your Highness," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I sense that I may have offended you in some way." Veliura's breath caught. She had thought he wouldn't notice. "I don't know what you mean," she replied, trying to sound dismissive, but her voice betrayed her. It wavered just enough that Ryan noticed. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You seemed distant at the demonstration. I thought I might have done something to upset you." Veliura's heart began to race. Why was he asking? Why did he care? "No offense was taken," she replied quickly, her words cutting through the air like a sharp blade. "I simply had other matters to attend to." Ryan studied her for a moment, then spoke again. "I don't believe that." Veliura's breath hitched, but she didn't look away. "I assure you, Commander, There is nothing to discuss." For a moment, there was silence between them. Ryan took a small step closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "You don't have to pretend. I know something's bothering you. If it's me, I'll leave. But if it's something else, I'm here to listen." Veliera's chest tightened. She wasn't used to anyone being so direct, so honest. Most of the court was always careful with their words around her, always too eager to gain favor. But Ryan, he didn't care about impressing her. He didn't care about the throne or the political game. That made her nervous. Her words faltered for a moment, and she swallowed hard. "I don't know what you want from me, Commander." Ryan took another step forward. But this time, he kept a respectful distance. "I don't want anything from you, Your Highness. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't cause you discomfort." Veliera's eyes met his, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time, she didn't feel powerful or in control. She felt exposed, vulnerable. And something inside her didn't want to admit it, but it was undeniable. She didn't want him to leave. Princess Veliera stood motionless as Commander Ryan Voss remained just a few feet away from her, his gaze unwavering. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken words. Veliera felt a battle raging inside her. She was the heir to the Zillathian throne, trained in diplomacy, in strategy, in maintaining control. Yet here she was, standing face to face with a human soldier who, without even trying, had disrupted everything. Ryan's steady gaze didn't make her feel threatened, though. No, it made her feel seen. Something she wasn't used to. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she broke the silence. "You don't understand," she said, her voice a little softer than she intended. "You're a human. You're not like us. You don't belong here." Ryan didn't flinch at her words. He didn't back away or get offended. Instead, he took another small step forward, his voice low but firm. "Maybe I don't belong here, but that doesn't mean I can't try to understand. And right now, I can see that something's bothering you, Your Highness. I just want to help." Veliera's chest tightened. She wanted to shout at him, tell him to leave, to stop pushing her. But something in his voice, something in the way he looked at her, made it impossible to do that. "You don't need to help me," she said, but even to her own ears, her words sounded hollow. Ryan tilted his head slightly. "I think I do." He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. "Look, I may be human, but I know what it feels like to be lost, to feel like no one really understands you." His words hit her harder than she expected. The princess, who had always been surrounded by people, felt the weight of his statement deep in her heart. Lost. She had never thought of herself that way before. She had always been the heir, always had a purpose, always had control. But did she truly understand herself? Did she truly know what she wanted? Ryan took another step closer, but this time, Veliera didn't pull away. "You don't have to explain everything to me, but I want you to know I'm not here to judge you." The princess found herself staring at him, her breath unsteady. "I've never met anyone like you," she whispered before she could stop herself. Ryan gave a small, almost amused smile. "I've never met anyone like you, either." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the air between them thick with emotions neither knew how to handle. Veliera, the princess, with the entire galaxy watching her every move, felt a small but significant shift inside her. She didn't feel in control anymore. But for the first time, she felt free in a way she couldn't explain. Ryan reached out, gently placing a hand on the armrest of her chair, close enough for her to feel his presence, but not too close to invade her space. "You don't have to carry all of this alone, Your Highness. Not if you don't want to." Veliera looked down at his hand, her pulse quickening. She didn't know what this was, what was happening between them, but she knew one thing. It was only the beginning. The days that followed were unlike anything Princess Veliera had experienced before. The peace talks continued, and her responsibilities as heir to the Zillathian throne demanded her attention. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something irreversible. She had seen Ryan Voss almost every day since their private conversation. Each time, the same strange sense of attraction mixed with unease swirled inside her. She couldn't help but watch him whenever he was in the same room. She noticed how others looked at him, some with awe, others with uncertainty. He was a human, yet he carried himself with such assurance that it was impossible not to notice. And every time she saw him, her chest tightened, as though something deep inside her was calling out to him. It was evening when the realization finally hit her. She had been standing in front of a large window in her chamber, staring out at the distant stars when the thought crossed her mind. She didn't just admire him. She was drawn to him. Ryan. He wasn't like any of the warriors she had known before. He didn't try to impress her with strength, status, or skills. He wasn't like the Zolothian lords who constantly tried to win her favor. Ryan just was. Her heart raced. How had she not seen it before? Why hadn't she noticed how her thoughts always turned to him? How she found herself searching for his presence at every gathering, even if it meant breaking a royal custom. The realization struck with the force of a lightning bolt. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of herself. She was afraid of how alive she felt when he was near. It was as if her carefully structured world had begun to crumble with every passing day. Her thoughts, her feelings, they were all tangled, and she didn't know how to sort them out. Veliera turned away from the window, her mind racing. She needed to see him, to hear him again, to understand what this was, because right now she only knew one thing. She couldn't let this feeling continue unchecked. The next day, the royal gardens were quiet, with only a few scattered nobles enjoying the afternoon sun. Veliera wandered through the lush greenery, her mind lost in thought. She was trying to make sense of her emotions when she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Your Highness," Ryan's voice called out gently. Veliera stopped in her tracks and turned to face him. He was standing a few paces away, his hands clasped behind his back, a calm yet expectant look on his face. "Ryan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, each one hanging in the balance. Veliera's heart pounded in her chest, and she realized that she had to face this. She couldn't keep pretending like nothing was happening. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "about what you said the other day, about not carrying the weight alone." Ryan's eyes softened, and he took a step closer. And Veliera took a deep breath, her gaze meeting his. She knew now. This wasn't just some passing attraction. It was real. "I'm not sure where this is going, but I can't ignore it anymore," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You make me feel things I didn't think I could feel." Ryan took another step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "Veliera, I don't have all the answers, but maybe we don't need them right now." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Veliera felt like she wasn't alone. Not just as a princess, but as a person. The days after Veliera's quiet conversation with Ryan Voss seemed to pass in a blur. Her heart raced every time she saw him, and even though she tried to maintain her usual royal composure, a part of her was no longer the same. Veliera had always been sure of herself. She knew who she was, what her duties were, and how to keep emotions at bay. But since meeting Ryan, everything had shifted. She felt something deep and unknown stir within her, something that made her feel alive in ways she couldn't explain. For the first time, she wasn't sure what the future held, but there was something about Ryan, something raw and real, that made her want to take that step into the unknown. It was late one evening when she found herself walking down the palace corridor. The cool air felt refreshing against her skin as she neared the training room where Ryan often practiced. The sounds of clashing weapons and distant voices echoed through the hall, but something about it felt peaceful now. She hesitated before pushing open the door. Inside, Ryan was alone, working through a series of combat drills. His movements were precise and fluid, his focus unwavering. There was a calm intensity about him, a strength that wasn't just physical but mental, emotional. As she stepped into the room, Ryan paused and looked up. His eyes softened when he saw her, and for a moment, it was as if the world outside the walls of the palace disappeared. "Princess," he said, his voice steady but warm. "Ryan," she replied, stepping closer. She had no plan, no script for what she was about to say, but she knew she had to speak her truth. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," Veliura began, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I realize that I can't deny what I feel anymore. You've changed something in me, something I didn't know was even possible." Ryan's expression softened. He didn't speak, just watched her, waiting for her to continue. "I spent my life doing what's expected of me, playing the role I was born into," Veliura continued, her gaze locking with his. "But when I'm with you, it's like everything I've known feels smaller, different." Ryan took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't have to explain it all now, Veliura. We don't need to have all the answers. But if this is something real for you, if this connection we feel means something, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The simple words, the honesty in his voice, made something inside Veliura snap into place. She had always thought she needed to have everything figured out. But for the first time in her life, she felt like it was okay to not know. Without thinking, she stepped closer to him, closing the distance between them. The space that had once felt so overwhelming now felt like it was meant to be filled. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered, "but I know that I want to see this through. I want to see where this goes." Ryan reached out and gently took her hand. His touch was warm, grounding. "Then we'll take it one step at a time, together." And in that moment, Veliura realized that the life she had planned, the one that was so carefully controlled, was not the one she wanted anymore. There was a new path now, one she had never imagined before, and it began with Ryan. A path that would be full of uncertainty, but also full of possibility. Together, they would walk it.